All right. Thank you, everyone. Welcome for joining us at this Getting Started with ORCID, How to Prepare for Federal Policies webinar. To begin, I'll start us off with some introductions. Your ORCID US community staff are pictured here. We have Sheila Rabin, the lead strategist for research infrastructure programs, Paolo Gahilde, the senior strategist for the ORCID US community, and myself, Kayla Ramhet, program specialist for the ORCID US community. We also have some guest speakers who will be joining us today. We have Carly Robinson, Senior Policy Fellow at Spark. We also have Bart Trawick, Head of the Customs Services section of the National Center for Biotechnology Information, the National Library of Medicine, and National Institutes of Health. We will also hear from Brittany Sandler, the research support librarian for the School of Medicine at Washington University in St. Louis. And we will also hear from two guest speakers from Florida International University, Dr. Yesham Darichi, Associate Provost for Faculty Success, and David Dreisbach, Assistant Vice President of Research in the Office of Research and Economic Development. So I'll quickly go over our agenda for today. We'll start by giving a very, very brief introduction to ORCID. So many of you may already be familiar with ORCID, but for any participants who are new or unfamiliar, we're just going to give a very, very brief intro. Then we'll talk about federal agency requirements and followed up by a presentation on SciENcv and ORCID. Then we'll go into how your organization can prepare for these federal agency requirements and policies. And then we'll hear from some case studies from Washington University at St. Louis and Florida International University on how they're preparing for these policies and requirements. And then lastly, we'll have some resources at the end we'll share, and then we'll have time for a Q&A. All right, so the very brief intro. What is ORCID? So ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. ORCID is an identifier that is meant to uniquely identify researchers and contributors so that they can get credit for their work, streamline their digital identity, and make it easier to save time on administrative tasks and keep track of your affiliations and contributions all in one place. So ORCID is a nonprofit, community-driven organization that serves the global research community. So there are three main components that make up ORCID. The ORCID ID, which is that unique persistent identifier free of charge for researchers and contributors. The ORCID record, which is the place where information about the researcher and individual is located online. And then the ORCID API or Application Programming Interface, which is the method for making connections between an organization's systems and an individual's ORCID record. So I mentioned that ORCID ID. It is that free unique identifier for researchers and contributors. It is a 16-digit number, and you'll see this example here, Paolo's ORCID ID. You'll see it looks like a link, and that's because it is. And if you click on that link, it brings you directly to his ORCID record, which is similar to what you might see as an online CV, which keeps track of activities, affiliations, and all of your work in one place. So that was a very, very brief intro to ORCID, and I will now pass things on to Carly to give us information about federal agency requirements. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you, and I will start sharing. So hopefully you all can see that. Really appreciate being with you all today. I'm going to give a very brief overview of kind of the policies, the White House guidance that agencies are now implementing. And so, as a reminder, the PID requirements from federal agencies come from two White House memos. So I'll quickly talk through those. The first is National Security Presidential Memo number 33, or NSPM 33, which was released in January of 2021. So this was at the very end of the first Trump administration. I think it was the last week, actually. And there are two references to persistent identifiers in that memo. And to kind of summarize what it said that researchers supported by or working on research grants must be registered with a PID service that identifies them. And then the second part is that in developing standardized grant disclosure forms, persistent identifiers for individuals need to be integrated in those forms to minimize administrative burden. So because this came out at the end of the first Trump administration, there was a new administration coming in. agencies had some questions about kind of what the expectations were with this memo. The Biden administration continued to support this, and the National Science and Technology Council's Research Security Subcommittee, which is an ongoing, long-standing subcommittee that includes representations from across the agencies, including the White House. And in my former role, I also served on this. But we developed an implementation guide to help understand kind of what the expectations were for NSPM 33. And there was an entire section that focused on persistent identifiers being integrated into grant disclosure forms. And we also had a definition for what the US government means when they talk about persistent identifiers. So, one of the requirements in NSPM 33 was to develop these common disclosure forms for all agencies to use. And those forms are the biographical sketch and the current and pending other support forms. And so there's a group that worked on developing forms that could be used across agencies. This was co-led by NIH and NSF, and agencies worked together to develop these. And so once there were these common forms, OSTP released a policy in 2024 saying all agencies need to use those, and those forms need to collect a persistent identifier for the senior key persons associated with that funding application and that award. And so you can see a screenshot of the guidance that's included there. So that is NSPM 33. I now briefly want to talk about the next White House guidance memo, which is the 2022 OSTP Public Access Memo. And there is a section in that memo that is focused on ensuring scientific and research integrity. And I should say that NSPM 33 timeline for implementation, we are past that, and so there is an expectation that agencies should have all of that implemented. There are some agencies still working on those requirements, but that timeline has passed, and so there are a lot of requirements in place. The timeline for this 2022 public access memo for this section on scientific and research integrity is still in the future. Actually, it's for implementation by the end of 2027, but some agencies are ahead of the game. So what this says is this memo requires agencies to collect and make publicly available metadata describing scholarly publications and data research outputs. And that metadata should include the author names as well as their associated persistent identifier, so that's ORCID IDs, the author's affiliations and persistent identifiers, which at this point most agencies are using ROR Research Organization Registry identifiers. Also, the funding sources, which include the funding organization and the award number and any associated persistent identifiers. Also need to make the publication or availability date available, and then a persistent identifier for the award. The memo also instructs agencies to tell researchers that they need to have a persistent identifier to uniquely identify themselves. So that's that ORCID ID. And also to assign a persistent identifier to intramural and extramural research. So, as part of that timeline, agencies were supposed to update their public access plans by the end of 2027. Most agencies did that. They submitted them to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy to be reviewed. And then we had an administration change. And so the current administration is still kind of generally supportive of these things. A lot of agencies have kind of rolled this public access implementation into their gold standard science plans. And so we still anticipate that agencies are kind of moving forward with integrating persistent identifiers in these areas. Okay, so moving on to kind of where agencies currently are in their implementation. So because deadlines have already passed for the common forms, there's a lot of work that's gone into persistent identifiers for individuals, but I'll also hit on persistent identifiers for outputs. So there are different point within agencies' workflows where persistent identifiers for individuals come into play. So starting at the very kind of early stages as you're applying for funding, these can be included in the common forms, the biographical sketch, and the current pending other support forms. And you'll hear Bart talk more about that in relation to SciENcv. But some agencies are already requiring persistent identifiers in those forms, DOE and NIH. FDA actually requires persistent identifiers for those conducting research to be included in their data management plans. And then for Department of Education and NSF, you can optionally collect ORCID IDs in the forms right now, and we are thinking that our requirement is coming soon. Now, some agencies just have broad policies at this point, kind of reflecting the expectation in the 2022 OSTP memo. So DOE, Department of Education, EPA, NASA Science Mission Directorate, and USDA all have policies that say if you are awarded funding from those agencies or a researcher at those agencies, you're expected to have a PID for yourself, so an ORCID ID. And then on kind of implementation of that, some agencies now are collecting them with research output. So DOE collects them with all research outputs, Department of Transportation collects them with publications and reports, EPA and USDA collect them with publications and data. And then also with this implementation, a number of kind of agency systems have ORCID integrations as well. There are more than this, but just in terms of kind of collecting some of the requirements, DOE's Office of Science has a portfolio analysis management system called PAMS that collects ORCID IDs there. NIH, their ERI Commons system, I believe, is requiring them in there now. And then USDA is collecting them in their researcher profiles. In terms of what's coming up, I said we're expecting more related to those common forms. My understanding is there's conversations with DOD and Department of Education where they are considering requiring them in the forms. And we think that's coming up with NSF and USDA this year. Some agencies have addressed the 2022 memo expectations in their public access plans already that are made public. So Census is one of those, and they've said that they will require grantees to have PIDs for themselves, and they'll collect them with research outputs by the end of 2027. And then quickly switching gears to persistent identifiers for outputs, which is most commonly DOIs at this point. There are agencies that already have these requirements in place, so that's what this is. So some have requirements for publications. Typically, this is the agency requiring that a DOI for the publication be collected within the metadata because publishers are assigning those. For data, the persistent identifier is typically assigned by the repository hosting the data, but might be assigned by the agency and is typically collected when reporting those outputs to the agencies. And then some agencies have requirements for the other outputs. So DOE, EPA, and USDA require a persistent identifier with publications. The Administration for Community Living, Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, DOE, EPA, IMLS, NASA Science Mission Directorate, and USDA have requirements around PIDs for data. And then DOE and NASA both have requirements for software, and then DOE also has requirements for their technical reports. And like I said, there is more upcoming related to the OSTP 2022 memo implementation. Census and Department of Justice's National Institute of Justice is planning to have these requirements in place for publications and data. And then the Administration for Children and Family will have them for data as well. So that was fast and furious, but I will stop sharing now and I think hand it over to Bart. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Okay. All right. Hopefully my screen is showing now. I got my slides up. And I'm going to talk about SciENcv and ORCID. So SciENcv has been around for about 12 years now. It is a tool that helps grant applicants fill out some of the paperwork that is required as part of these grant applications, mainly biographical sketches and current and pending other support forms. So the entire grant package has many other parts to it, and SciENcv covers these two forms. And the analogy I like to use when I'm talking with my parents, like, hey, what do you do? And what is this SciENcv thing? For those of us in the United States that go through our annual process of filing our tax returns to the IRS, you can kind of think of SciENcv in a similar fashion. So the government wants some information from you and they want it in a PDF. And there are different web applications out there. You might have heard TurboTax and Free Tax USA and H&R Block. Those are web systems that help you fill out that form and help you like enter the information into the system, and then we'll generate the PDF for you. And SciENcv is similar like that. It's available here at the National Library of Medicine on our website. Anybody can come in and use it. It is there to help aggregate information that you might have in other systems. I'm going to talk about ORCID, which is the main one that you're able to pull information from. It will put it into the form. It will produce the properly formatted document. So then you have it, you certify it, and you're able to send it in with your grant application. TurboTax and these other tax preparation applications will let you, maybe you come back year after year and you have your old forms there and you can update them and use that information to fill out the new forms. And SciENcv, same concept. We store all of your biographical sketches. You can have as many as you want. We understand that there are investigators that might have several different grant opportunities that they're going after, and they want to have a biosketch that highlights their particular expertise. They might have a clinical grant application or a basic science one, and they kind of want to highlight their expertise for these different opportunities that they're going after. So in SciENcv, you can have as many of these as you want. Print out the PDF when you're ready to send it. If you want to make a change, just go back to the web form, update your information, and create the PDF. You're off to the races. Now, behind the scenes, what makes this all happen is that we have structured data. So when we first set up SciENcv many years ago, all the federal agencies had similar biosketches, but they were kind of different, but generally asking for the same kind of information. So we originally created SciENcv with a structured data format in the background that could output the information into whatever form that you were using for whichever agency you were applying to. So if you had created a biosketch in the NIH format and then you wanted to apply for an NSF grant opportunity, you could take the information from your NIH biosketch and create an NSF one, and all that information would transfer over, and you would just fill in the blanks for like the 10% that wasn't common between both forms. And as Carly was mentioning, the good news now is that agencies are now moving towards a common format. So all of the forms are now aligning to that same type of structure and format, which is fantastic. It makes it even easier. SciENcv can still output to many different agency formats. So if you come in and you fill it in for the USDA grant application, you can also quickly turn around and create documents for NSF, NIH, and a host of other agencies. So Carly walked through all of the federal requirements and how it's kind of been leading towards these persistent identifiers and having this type of information added as part of the research security process. And I just took one of the documents. This is from the implementation guidance that came out during the Biden administration, just to kind of draw a few lines to show you how SciENcv kind of helps to satisfy the guidance that was put out for these federal agencies. Well, first of all, we allow ORCID identifiers to be added into our forms. So there's the digital persistent identifier piece checked off. They also said that you should authenticate. You need to actually sign in and say, yes, this is my account. This is my persistent identifier. And guess what? If you have an ORCID account already, you can use that to sign into SciENcv. You come to SciENcv, you choose the ORCID pathway, you go to ORCID, you sign in with your credentials, you come back. Now we know, aha, this is this individual. They've got an ORCID account. This is their identifier. And you'll see those automatically get added into the forms that you create. And when you have that ORCID profile set up, you have lots of information there. You have your work history, your educational history, your citations. All of that information is a gold mine when you're filling out these biographical sketches. And so that information that you've been working and creating in ORCID for your profile can then be pulled in to pre-populate the forms, which makes it very quick and easy to fill out for these grant applications. So you've linked your ORCID account to SciENcv, and now we automatically put in that ORCID identifier into the forms without you having to do anything else. So it flows right in. When you make the PDF, the ORCID identifiers are there. NIH has begun to require ORCID identifiers for all grant application, and we help satisfy that requirement. So if you've linked your ORCID account, you're in SciENcv, you're creating biosketches and current and pending other support forms for your NIH grant applications, that ORCID identifier is added right into the form. And when you go over and submit these forms into ERA Commons, that is what they're looking for. They are looking for the ORCID identifier. They're making sure that it matches what has been linked to your account in ERA Commons. So we kind of do a check all the way through this process. ORCID is a fantastic profile system. And one thing that's different about SciENcv, it's not a profile system because it's more a workspace that it's a report writer. So it helps you fill these forms out. But there's no like public page that you have where you can show. It's just a workspace for scientists to help fill these forms out. But if you've got your ORCID profile, it has all of that information. When you're in SciENcv, you've linked your ORCID account. When you're ready to fill out a form, so here I've got a grant application I'm filling out for the National Science Foundation. I'm making a biosketch. I've linked ORCID and I said, you know what? Let's make this fast. I want you, instead of just giving me a blank document that I have to fill out step by step, let's use that information that I have in ORCID. And we will make an API call as soon as you say, go ahead and create this. And we will pull the information from your ORCID profile and pre-populate many of the sections that are part of the common forms. Now, once this information is imported into the forms in SciENcv, it's static and you can change, you can add things, you can delete things, you can craft it so it is exactly what you want when you submit it off to your grant application. Then my favorite part of this is the ORCID citation feature. So if you've got your ORCID identifier, you're starting to use it and put it into your publications. Many publishers now accept this as part of the workflow process where you can add your ORCID identifier. And that really kicks things into high gear because now ORCID is constantly monitoring many different citation databases. Here at the National Library of Medicine, we run PubMed, which is great for scientists that publish in the life sciences, but there's many other types of science journals that PubMed doesn't cover. And ORCID is looking for your identifier in these other citation databases. So when you're in SciENcv, you might not have things that are in PubMed, but if you've linked your ORCID account and ORCID is doing this great job of finding all your publications, aggregating them, putting them into your ORCID profile, all of those are available for you in SciENcv from that connection to ORCID. You can add it into the biographical sketch, quickly add in the works that you want to highlight as part of your biosketch and put it onto the application. We've had a lot of usage over the years, especially the last couple of years. The National Science Foundation made SciENcv mandatory for all grant applications a couple of years ago. It was in 2024, spring of 2024. So they've been running SciENcv as mandatory for a couple of years. NIH is now requiring SciENcv for grant applications due by the end of May. So we've had 3 million PDFs that have been produced during that time. And that is the end of my deck. I'm going to hand it over to the next presenter.
Great. Thank you so much, Bart. And actually, one of the things that we've been working on with the ORCID US community is a how-to guide that specifically covers how ORCID works with SciENcv. And I think you're reviewing that for us, and we can also put a link to our draft of that in the chat in case anyone wants to take a look and test that out and give us feedback or leave feedback in the doc to help us finalize that guide. But aside from that, I'll take us through our top recommendations for how to prepare and help your researchers prepare for these policies and use their ORCID ID to their advantage during these federal funding workflows, but also in general. So helping researchers understand what ORCID is and how it can benefit them is one of the very first steps that you can do if you work with researchers. And in general, ORCID helps researchers distinguish themselves from others and get credit for their work, but also depending on the different organizations and software systems that a researcher works with, like we saw with SciENcv, for example, having information populated in your ORCID record can also save time and reduce that administrative burden for researchers during funding workflows, like with SciENcv, but also publishing and other reporting workflows. And we have a lot of resources available through the ORCID US community for supporting ORCID outreach and education for researchers. And all of those ideas and resources are summarized in our ORCID US Outreach Planning Guide, which we will link to in the chat. And along those lines, we do offer a free and open ORCID 101 webinar for researchers about 4 times a year. And we actually have one coming up on June 9th. So we'll share the link to that registration in the chat. So please register, join us for that. Invite your researchers to join us as well. And that is just a starting opportunity for helping your researchers learn what ORCID is, why they need one, how they can use it to their advantage. Now, we've also found working with over 200 organizations across the US over the last 8 years is that ORCID adoption can really benefit an entire organization as a whole, not just the library or not just the research office. The more internal partnerships, especially between the libraries and the research office, that can take place between internal stakeholders, the more strategic and beneficial your ORCID adoption can be for researchers, staff, and the organization as a whole. And we have a general guide for how to get started partnering with other stakeholders at your organization to adopt ORCID in that more strategic way and get those conversations going. The example that you're seeing on the slide here is from Rutgers University, where their faculty senate actually led an initiative to look into ORCID and make recommendations about investing in ORCID adoption on campus. And they received a response from the president of the university accepting their recommendation, which was to become an ORCID member and really encourage the use of ORCID at Rutgers. And that's just one example of how different stakeholders at an organization can come together to support ORCID adoption. So if your organization is not already a member of ORCID, that would be a great next step worth looking into. For-profit organizations can join ORCID as direct members, but if you're at a nonprofit organization, you can join through the ORCID US Community Consortium, which is a dedicated community of practice that is supported by Lyrasis as the consortium lead. And we work together with all of our partners to share best practices and encourage adoption of ORCID across the US. So this map shows a snapshot of our current members, with the darker points representing our newest members, but we're up to, I think, 221 member organizations right now. And one of the really great things about this community is that we share and learn from each other. For example, the 2 case studies that you are about to hear next. Okay, so now I'm just going to quickly make a side note here and explain that both researchers and organizations can really benefit from ORCID most when researchers have information populated in their ORCID record. And there are 3 ways to get information into a researcher's ORCID record. The first is for the researcher themselves to manually add their own information through the ORCID user interface online. The second way is if the researcher is affiliated with an organization that's a member of ORCID, that organization can use the ORCID member API to add information to a researcher's ORCID record for them, or the organization can use ORCID's affiliation manager tool to add information to researchers' ORCID records for them. So while all of these options are great, the best thing that an organization can do to help their researchers and the research information ecosystem as a whole is to use the ORCID member API to add verified information to researchers' ORCID records. So when data gets added to an ORCID record, you can see here on the screen in this first example, I added this information myself. You can see the source is my name and it's got this blue person icon. But when an organization uses the ORCID member API to add information to an ORCID record, we can see that the source is the name of the institution. We've got two examples here. And this green check mark basically serves as a trust marker, confirming that, yes, this person works at this institution. And so this makes the ORCID record a little bit more trustworthy, and improves that integrity of the information so that when these researchers go and apply for funding, use their ORCID data to populate their SciENcv form, for example, the funders can see that, oh yes, this person does work at these organizations because we can see that the organization added that information to their ORCID record for them. So this is the ultimate goal, is to have all organizations across the ecosystem adding this verified information to their researchers' ORCID records. And then finally, I also just want to note, ORCID is just one piece of the puzzle as you're working on ORCID adoption. Also keep in mind the other persistent identifiers that Carly mentioned at the beginning, because ORCID works together with these other identifiers, ROR for organizations, DOIs for outputs, but also inputs like grants. RAID is a relatively new persistent identifier for research projects. And we actually have a webinar coming up about RAID next week, and we'll share that later. And there are also discipline-specific persistent identifiers that may be applicable to you. So just keep these in mind as you're going forward. And of course, we're here to support you in all of this work as you go forward. So with that, I'll hand it over to Brittany to tell us what they're doing at Washington University in St. Louis to prepare for these policies and get on board with ORCID.
Thank you. Let me see if I can get my screen shared here. All right, hopefully everybody can see my slides there.
Yes.
Okay, so first, and I know they introduced this earlier, I am a research support librarian at Washington University School of Medicine, but specifically one of my roles is managing the ORCID program for the medical campus. And I know we talked about this all at the beginning, but yes, when the Nelson memo, OST, like NSPM 33, all of that came out, we at WashU, we wanted to start doing some assessing and reviewing and trying to figure out exactly like where our faculty sat in that, more than just a gate and, finding out, do they have an ORCID ID, yes or no, but kind of gathering additional data and tying that back to their research outputs and their funding to build a better story so that, when we went out to talk to them, we knew what we were talking to them about and could kind of guide them in the right direction. So very quick methodology. We used our WashU Medicine research profiles. It's the Pure platform. It's our RIM system. It's how we identified the faculty that we were looking at. Then we categorized them based on their primary appointments. And if they didn't have an ORCID, then we did additional searching on our own. So we went to orcid.org. I would go into Scopus. Sometimes we went to individual research output levels to try to verify an ORCID ID. And if we couldn't find one, we defaulted to none. And then we also looked at their funding. So we used NIH Reporter and NSF Award Search. And then most recently, we've also started digging in and kind of actually seeing what they are populating in their ORCID record to get details so that we know when we go and speak to them, we know what we're talking about. And this table summarizes sort of the main points of analysis that we've looked at. And we've been doing this since October of 2022. We do it biannually. The most recent one was in March of this year. As you can see, the numbers are all trending in the right direction, which is great. So my colleagues and I were apparently, giving the message nicely, which I'm happy about. But I will say, like, if I point out, like, NIH funding, when we first started this, only about 77% of the NIH funding that WashU was getting, we could tie back to somebody that had an ORCID ID. We're now up to almost 100%. So that's great. And then same thing with the ORCID record levels. So we take all of this data and then we kind of look at the bigger story so that we know what it is we're talking about. And these are just some of the graphs in that we look at. So one, like the graph on the left is talking about ORCID, yes or no. Do they even just have an ORCID ID? The one on the right actually ties their research output. So why I like this, why we use this is at first glance, you might go, oh, emergency medicine department has less than half their faculty with an ORCID ID. But the fact is that if I go and look at their research output, 85% of it is actually tied there. And then funding's not on this, but 100% of their funding is. So having this data allows us to go, you know what? The people that are actually publishing, the ones that are actually applying for grants regularly, et cetera, they are using ORCID ID. They know how, they are connecting it, et cetera. And so while we would love for everybody to have an ORCID ID, that's not where our focal point necessarily is. We're making sure first and foremost that the individuals that are publishing and applying for grants are covered and they're in compliance. Same thing, this is just another point of analysis when I look at actually their ORCID record details. And here you can see like they are, say like for the private record, I know we still have about, close to 5% of our faculty that we know they have an ORCID ID, but for whatever reason, they have chosen to maintain it as private. So for them, again, because we have the data and we know who it is, I can go and talk to them about why is this private? Is it mainly because they just set it at default and don't know, or how they can adjust their visibility settings so that they are sharing at least some key information like their affiliations, et cetera. And then we take that and we can move forward with it. And we also move forward with that with like SciENcv, as Bart was talking about, and training tables. And then we also have like our key recommendations that we give to our faculty. So one of the big things that we do with SciENcv is kind of like what Bart was alluding to, is the correlations. So education is one section in ORCID records that a lot of our faculty don't always populate. So we make a point of explaining to them, like, if your education is filled out and you set the visibility to green or yellow, then that directly goes into the professional preparation section of SciENcv. And when they can kind of start seeing where the one-for-one things are, they are much more apt to want to actually do that and populate it and see the benefit of it. Same thing with training tables. We get a lot of requests to help because there's a lot of information that goes into training tables for NIH. And again, if I go back to education, for some of the information for training tables like 8A through C, you can get some of that information from these sections. So again, once they start seeing where some of this information can be used, we get them more on board with wanting to use it. And that leads me to, like, I guess I'd say is probably our top 7 recommendations for faculty. And that is based off of, I hate to say it, issues or concerns or things that have come up that we keep saying all the time. So number 1, what most people may not think about, is to have a personal email set in their ORCID record and set it to private. We have had frequently faculty that have come to WashU now from other institutions, and at that other institution is where they registered for their ORCID ID and their ORCID record, and that's the only email that is associated with it. So, like, if you put a personal one in there, then regardless of what institution you're working at, if you move around, you have a new institutional email, having your personal one there still gets you access to your ORCID record, even on the interim. So that's a big recommendation. A delegate, we do recommend to all of our faculty to assign one, somebody part of their team. But then we also, when we're speaking to grants administrators and research administrators, we recommend to them to act as a delegate or a trusted individual for an ORCID record, to have another set of eyes to help maintain that record, or for last minute things that come up like getting a biosketch done, etc. We have encountered that. So having delegates and trusted individuals has been extremely important. Number 3, that's pretty self-explanatory, but it is one of the things, especially like when we talk to our faculty with purely private records, is the point that if somebody comes to your ORCID record, they should be able to immediately affiliate you with Washington University School of Medicine. You should be proud of having that on there. Make it green, make it public, period. 4 and 5 are kind of the same. Again, for the interoperability, I will say, especially for number 5, importing all their works, this tends to come up more with our faculty that have been around for a while, senior faculty that have 75 plus publications or the number of funding that they've received over the course of their career. The only reason they don't have it in their ORCID record is because they are overwhelmed. And the idea of doing it to another system is, kind of, I don't say terrifying, but not great. So we do go in and talk to them about the different import tools and specifically which import tools will pull in what information. And once they know that that stuff can be used and done accurately and quickly, again, I've been in the middle of a webinar and had a faculty member pull in all 100 plus of their publications, and they were shocked that it was all there. So it's just an educational thing. Number 6 is the most recent, having the NCBI My Bibliography link. So for us, it's been a little point of frustration or contention that that is no longer part of the common form biosketch, which is fine. But because it's not there, we've been pointing out to our faculty that they can put that same link in their website section of their ORCID records so that if they're using the common form and they, somebody clicks on that ORCID URL link and it gets them to their ORCID record, if they still want their My Bibliography link available, they can. It can just be in the website section and they're happy and they're fine and it's still accessible. And then the last one is logging in with their ORCID ID for platforms for manuscripts and grant applications, say like Editorial Manager for manuscripts, Proposal Central, that's the little screenshot thing that's down in the lower corner. We tell the faculty, like, you're going to have to log in anyway. Like if you're going to do a grant application in Proposal Center, you're going to have to log in. You might as well log in with your ORCID ID, because if you do that, then it identifies Proposal Central as a trusted organization. You can go through that process. And then if you win that award, Proposal Central will write all of the necessary information back to their ORCID record without them having to do anything. So sometimes just knowing that, I'm like, you're going to do it anyway. You might as well go this route instead of an alternate login route, because then that makes additional connections and then you get kind of a win-win in the long run. So those are all of our key things that we're doing right now. I look forward to some questions at the end of all of this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brittany. And now we'll hear from David and Yasham about what they're doing at Florida International University.
Thank you, Sheila. Dr. Yasham Dorici and I are happy to be on the call today to join this excellent conversation with all this great information that's been provided over the last 45 minutes. We're happy to talk about some of the exciting efforts we've embarked on at FIU. To give a little bit of context, as mentioned earlier, I'm an assistant vice president for research in the Office of Research. I've been focused over the years on building out a lot of infrastructure and lots of projects, of which you're going to see some of this today. And I'm also going to be presenting here today with Dr. Yasham Dorici. Yasham, would you mind saying something about yourself?
Hi, I've been at FIU for almost 40 years now, and these are the positive changes we are running into. And I had the pleasure of working with David in the last 3-4 years, and it's called Faculty Success, and the heart of it is ORCID. Mm-hmm. And I am an associate provost right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasham. And also just quickly mention about Florida International University. We're a large R1 public research university in Miami. We're a relatively young university. We have over 50,000 students, and we have a broad faculty base of almost 2,000 faculty spanning 11 different colleges. So there's a lot going on at the university, and what we wanted to talk with you about, a lot of the work that is related to here. There's been a lot of hard work prior to 2022. We've been a member of the ORCID community for a number of years, and we've had a lot of collaborations across our institution with the library to build and other stakeholders to build out different infrastructure, of which some of it we're going to talk about today. But what we felt like was really important in the context of the discussion around compliance was to give you maybe a broader picture as to how we see things at the institution in terms of being effective in implementing. And I think on that note, Yeshem and I really started, as she mentioned, working closely together in 2022. And I think, Yeshem, would you mind saying something about when we first started interacting with each other? In what context?
The idea was helping faculty to get more awards, to be more visible, to be more successful. And the bottom line was, of course, helping FIU for the rankings. It all depends on how the faculty data is perceived by those databases. So it started with, digital presence, optimizing their digital presence.
And one of the first conversations we had was I was talking with Yeshem about her ORCID profile, and some of the steps we did today were, this is what one of our initial conversations was. And the diagram on the top right here, we have lots of different systems. We see here from our perspective, we want to get information correct in all different places. ORCID, we have a lot of institutional systems. There's SciENcv. You're going to hear about FIU Discovery. And so as we started working, we formalized the initiative into what we call a faculty success initiative. So I work in the Office of Research. She works in the Provost Office. And we've been partnering with different entities across the institution, across the colleges to implement what we're talking about. Our initial phase of the Faculty Success Initiative, ultimately it's about aligning the infrastructure that we have at the institution with faculty success. And a lot of the work that we've been putting in place is, as Yeshem mentioned, around optimizing digital presences. There's a lot to talk about as it relates to all of these squares that are here, but what you're going to hear mostly about is this optimizing digital presence and a bit about broadening the scope of high quality information. We'll get to that towards the end. At the heart of what we've done at the institution, similar to the previous presenter, we do have, research information management systems. In our case, we have a few different technologies involved. We use digital science symplectic elements. We have Vivo front end. We have a few different things, but ultimately we have a public portal called discovery.fiu.edu. It's your conventional expert finder system. I encourage you to take a look at it. We've been building that over a number of years. And that is part of where we've been directing faculty. In line with that, what has been helpful for us in engaging faculty is explaining to faculty about their information. And part of our infrastructure gathers information from different databases, aggregates it, and then it connects to the ORCID system. So as we engage faculty, we explain to them, well, there's some of your data is in a ranking database in Web of Science, some of it's in Scopus, your information's in multiple places. Here's one way that you can get your information to the right places. And on the right-hand side, we have an important system for our faculty. It's where they're evaluated. It's called Panther 180, right? And so ultimately, as we're talking with our faculty, we're trying to show them how ORCID can be a key component in getting their information correct in multiple places. Yeshem, do you want to add anything?
And here also we are working with faculty. Initially, we are working with tenure track faculty. I've been faculty for the years, and the thing is, faculty don't do what you tell them to do, and they are extremely busy. We sympathize with that. Therefore, we did this FIU Discovery at FIU, and then we have all the information, then we populate ORCID, then there had to be something in it for them, because not everybody applying NSF and had to have that. So our success depended on this simplifies your life. You don't have to sit down and type things. This is going to automatically populate. So then initially we had several steps. Again, we minimized it. It's like get your ORCID ID, auto-populate your ORCID profile from FIU Discovery and connect it to wherever you want to connect it to. But in our case, all our evaluations, everything is done in Panther 180. And before this, they were typing everything in. So now they don't. It automatically populates, and for their tenure processes, for their promotion, whatever, it is automized if they work with us.
Yeah. And so as she mentioned, we created 3 basic steps. So originally I had maybe 50 steps, and then we narrowed it down to 3. And that's the value of working with faculty directly in these projects, right? And so we've spanned all of our colleges. As she mentioned, we focused initially on tenured and tenure track faculty. Although our sort of ecosystem of information is broader than that, our prioritization was on the tenured and tenure track faculty, at least initially. And here are some of the statistics we have. We have over 90% of our tenured and tenure track faculty, about 800 of them. 90% of them we've been able to find their ORCID ID. And I think more impressively that 80% have actually gone through those 3 steps to at least get the information that we have found for them flowing out to ORCID, and that adds up to about over 66,000 works that we've automated for them. So it's it's taken some time, and we have not been pushing it on faculty. We've been trying to meet the faculty where they are. And I think that gets us to some of the tips that we had here we wanted to share. We have like a minute or 2 left here. I think it's key to apply project management principles in this and look at your environment and understand your stakeholders that are there and build relationships. I think that was said earlier. I think it's also key that your project, you think about the quality of information and, encouraging faculty. And I think faculty, especially that are researchers, appreciate high quality, and defining that with them and explaining to them, hey, if it's high quality, it can be in multiple places, it can be accurate, it can be used for multiple purposes. And ultimately, it's most important to meet faculty where they are, right? When they're doing proposals, when they're having to do their fill out the common forms using SciENcv. That's where we have been really trying to meet with faculty. And there's really no better place than faculty evaluations, right? And that's where this partnership with the provost office in Yeshem has been key, because we're helping faculty understand where they can get their information in multiple places so that it paints the best story for them and for the university. There's many other places that we're looking to engage them on, but these are just some of the key processes. Ultimately, it's most important to keep things simple. And I think we talked about that a bit earlier in the presentation about trying to keep things very simple. We do have some next steps here, and we only have 5 minutes left in the overall. I know there's some time for Q&A. We're aiming to get 100% adoption of our existing population, and then we're looking to expand to reach out to all the faculty that we have. That includes like teaching professors. And of course, ORCID we think is important for our graduate students as well too. I mean, there's a lot of other plans, but ORCID is in the center of all of it. We're also, I think one of the exciting things we're working on is trying to expand the scope of the scholarly works that are automated. I think other persistent identifiers were mentioned, like DOIs and so forth, that we want to try to also engage with and map to the new ORCID work types that support arts and humanities. I think that's particularly exciting, as a lot of the works that we've automated. We're trying to get our infrastructure expanded to all the forms of productivity as best as we can. And last but not least, we are also, I'm co-leading an effort with another organization that's of the federal agencies working with research universities called FDP. And we have a project there that aims to streamline the process for faculty and administrators in the context of applying for federal funding, which, if you didn't know, FDP was an organization that, through BART and others, have helped get initiatives like SciENcv to be as successful as they are, and ORCID as well. So we're excited to kind of take some of our institutional knowledge here and also learn from others across the community on how this process for faculty and the process of applying for federal funding can be improved. I think with that, I'm going to wrap up and pass it back to you, Sheila.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David and Dr. Dorici. Also, thank you, Brittany, Bart, and Carly, for being our guest speakers today. And thanks, everyone, for spending this time with us. We do have a few minutes for questions. Feel free to put those into the chat. And if we run out of time, if you have to leave, don't worry, we will follow up with all of these materials, the recording slides, and also Q&A answers. The slide deck will have some helpful resources linked of course, always contact us at orcidus@lyrasis.org. We're happy to work with everyone one-on-one. Don't forget, we've got those upcoming events. We'll include information about that in the materials. And then also note when you leave this session, a survey will pop up. And if you can just answer those 2 questions for us, that'll really help us out. Okay, so I do see a few questions that have come in. So let's see how far we can get here. Let's see. Okay, so this is a question about when a person, either an employee or a student, is no longer associated with your institution. How do you manage that? How do you track that information? And how do you make the ORCID record reflect that? That's a great question. And the answer kind of varies depending on how that information got into the person's ORCID record to begin with. So if an individual manually added their employment affiliation to their own ORCID record, then it's up to that individual to go back in and update the end date of that affiliation when they leave the institution. But if your organization is actively adding those affiliations to ORCID records, if you're including the date range, then you will need to have some sort of workflow in place where when a person leaves, it triggers an action to update the end date. And same thing for any type of affiliation, whether it's employment or education. And if you want to email us, we can work with you specifically within your context to help you figure out how to manage that. Another question, what parts of the university organizations are managing affiliation information? I don't know if any of our panelists want to speak to that. I can also speak generally.
I would say that at FIU, I mean, the Office of the Provost, I think, plays a key role in managing the faculty's affiliations. But our central system of PeopleSoft is where a lot of that information is actually managed. So depending upon the process, it may be a few different people involved. But we do write the affiliation information from our FIU Discovery out to their. We pull information from our PeopleSoft HR system.
I will say quickly.
Research office.
Yeah.
Yeah, WashU at this point, as an institution is not doing that. We do have affiliation manager, and part of I would say the only reason we aren't is just a lack of agreement across the institution wide as far as what specifically goes in there. So it will be within the next year, but as far as how that's going to be done is still being discussed.
Thank you all. And yes, I would echo that generally from other organizations that we've talked to, that affiliation information is usually in some sort of HR system like PeopleSoft or Workday or something similar. So it does take that kind of cross-unit coordination in many cases to make all the data flow the way it needs to. Okay, so I recognize that we are at the end of our hour. We've gone 1 minute over, but please do email us if you have further questions about this. We want to hear from you. We're happy to work with you and help you figure out next steps for your specific context. If your question didn't get answered and it's in the chat, that's okay. We'll make sure it's answered in the notes that we send out after this. And I just want to say thank you again to everyone for spending time with us today. Hopefully this was helpful and helped you think more and be more aware about what's going on with ORCID in the US. Thanks again to all of our guest presenters. We really appreciate you. And hopefully we'll see you all again at one of our upcoming events. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.